to another episode of the Independent Mindset, the podcast for candid conversations, staying curious, and simply being better. So today I'm gonna let Jason run with this topic, or a slew of topics actually. But before we just jump into it, what's up, man? I think we just both woke up, so we both look exhausted.
I think we're both still half in the bag right now. And do you know what I was thinking about yesterday? Like, I know we're the same age and all, but it's really funny how most of what we do always really lines up at the same time. Like, we both got our driver's license pretty much right at the same time. We both bought a house right, like, within
Same year.
a month of each other.
Yeah, it was that close, eh?
The only thing that we did do at the same time is you got married before me. Like, other than that one there, like, we've pretty much always done exactly the same things right around the same time frame. And right
That's
now,
true.
we're both still so deep in renovations, fault of having a place each. But it seems like whenever one's doing something, the other one's always kind of mirroring him somehow.
Yeah, no, good point. I didn't realize. Thank you. Sorry, I got a coffee delivered.
Got
by
a
my lovely wife.
Unexpected visitor.
Yeah. No, I forgot we bought our houses basically a month from each other.
Yeah, and man, did we ever time the market? Holy shoot, without trying to time the market.
Yeah, everybody keeps telling me that too. And you're like, yes, but at the same time, it was still insane when we bought our house. But it's gotten that much more insane in the last year.
You're in the Ottawa area, right?
Yep.
I was talking to someone who her sister and her husband are also in the Ottawa area. It seems for some reason everyone we know lives in either in Ottawa or Moncton. I don't know if that's where people live. But anyway, so this couple, they wanted a house that was, I think it was on 50 acres. A little bit of older house, a bit more of a fixer-upper. But it was really to have that plot of land, go camp, go hunt, go fish, make the place your own as you go through the years. It was selling for $425. These people offered.
This was well outside of Ottawa.
Yeah. Like enough in the countryside, but still,
Yeah.
Ottawa region. I forget exactly where. So, anyways, the asking was $425. They offered $515, $90K above. They got outbid by about $100,000.
Yep. So houses started making the news here in the Ottawa region about. This would have been at least 2 years ago, because it was probably before we started really looking for houses. And one had made the news, and this was just the beginning of a trend that's happened almost weekly now. Is a house got out, and this was like a nothing house. Like it might have even been partly attached to another house. It was overbid by like the asking price by over $200,000.
Insane.
This is a house where like years ago wouldn't be worth $200,000 probably.
Well, you saw that with Vancouver was the canary in the coal mine, where there was a game for a while, Crack Shack or Mansion. It was just these dilapidated, just awful bungalows that were falling apart. Probably, didn't even have vinyl windows yet. And you had to guess, is it a crack shack that's been condemned and repossessed by the bank? Or is it listed for $1 million plus? And it was a coin flip every time.
Yep.
So that's kind of like what we're talking about today, is just what in the world is going on.
Yeah, I think Jason just wanted to have a little kind of ranty episode where we can cover a bit of what's happening around the world, what's happening in our own country, and a bit of, I guess, of an opinion piece on it, if you will.
Yeah, no, today's going to be pure opinion, disclaimer here. It's going to be a great one. If ever you disagree with us, there's going to be plenty to disagree with. Hey, comment, make a response video, come on the show next time, and we'll chat it out. It's going to be a lot funner that way. I'll tell you where I want to start. The finance thing's a little bit more my wheelhouse. The political thing's a little bit more yours. And
is it anyone's though?
Yeah, fair. I saw a headline where I think it was one of these far left things. It was like MSNBC or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was like the secret benefits of inflation, rising wages. And if you have two brain cells to rub together, you see that and you just think, oh, you fucking morons.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we'll make it way too simple. wages is always the last thing to rise, and they always rise a lot less than the cost of living. There you go. Our argument closed. Go look up at any stats, any
Yep.
tracking. You're going to see that it's always the last thing to go up. You're going to see that there's been stagnant wages since the 70s. You're going to see that I think it was wages have risen something like 800% since the 80s. So, like, hey, great, but that's nominally, right? So, let's say you were making $1 an hour, now you're making $8 an hour, or whatever, same equivalent.
Right.
But cars have gone up 1,500%. Houses have gone up 1,200%, and it's just on and on and
Thought
on.
it was
Like
12
just
million.
yeah. So it's just pick a cat. The worst one was post secondary education, something like 5,000%. It's just absurd.
Right.
So yeah, congratulations. You are now, instead of making 50K, making 55K, because that's the only way to shut you up.
And the
But
last 2 years have cost you well over what you were typically buying with your 50K. It's, you see that with even like, if you look at any union or employer group, whatever, that deals with salaries, that's why there's always, they're always like a couple years behind. Have you noticed?
yep,
You've got basically, whenever they work out a new deal, usually it's the union with the employer or whatever, it'll be like 2 years of retroactive pay already
yep.
because that contract was late. And then they're trying to adjust for the current and even the several years that have passed. They're trying to cover for those costs of living.
But let's say the unions do get what they're asking for, then yeah, like you said, you do get the retroactive. But that's an exception, right? Not every area is unionized, and when you are unionized, sure, like you can fight. You're always going to never be at the bottom of the pack, but you also never be at the top of the pack. And the first example that comes to mind for me is trades. Same thing if you take a hospital setting, you take a plumber, always going to have a job, always going to be the same hours, always going to be nice and comfortable. But their wages are going to be less than if they go to the private sector. But the private sector, you risk layoffs, you risk, it's going to be harder work. The conditions are going to be different. You're probably going to get spoken to not the same way that you would in a provincial government setting. So you get the trade offs there. So you'll never be at the bottom, but you certainly won't be making the money that you would if you take the chance and go out and and work in the private sector.
And that's if the government allows you to make a living in the first place.
Yeah. Where do you want to take that one?
I mean, I'm gonna save this for another episode, but simply to say, you want to talk about inflation and just the loss of buying power. I mean, look at what has happened to the middle class in the last year and a half. It's just bananas.
Yeah.
The wealth distribution. That's what's funny too. You've got so many. I'm not saying everybody, but you got so many of the same choir just preaching. Wealth. We need to redistribute wealth. Look at this gap. Like, there's a huge wealth gap. That's been the talking point for the last 5 to 10 years. And a bunch of these same people are just encouraging these edicts from all governments to go like, yep, anybody from the middle class who owns some sort of business, we're going to decide when you're essential, when you're not. Which again, to me, is if you made money to put food on the table today for your kids, you're essential, or for yourself. So that stuff's just, not only is it bothersome, but it has already demonstrated much wealth redistribution again from the other, in the other direction, where you have just a few of the rich families and companies who have been allowed and working with government to be able to basically create an even bigger monopoly on whatever service or product they offer, while making it illegal for mom and dad to open their shop,
I-
from 9 to 5.
I'm going to sound like a socialist here because I'm going to say, like, this is not real socialism. But here's something I've been pondering on the last little while. Capitalism has a limit, but what we have now, it ages out, it gets old. And you'll see what I mean by that in a second. But what we have now, and this is the, not real communism argument, what we have now is not real capitalism. We have corporatism, we have authoritarianism, and we're bordering on totalitarianism, especially with how the government's working. And what I mean by that is now we have, especially with the policies that we've espoused through the pandemic and everything, very much corporatism, because you have a select few corporate entities who have a great amount of not only power and wealth and market share, but leverage and lobbying power within the estate, the government estates. And it's quite authoritarian because it's, hey, small business, you are shutting down under penalty of fines, jail time, and whatever. And that's very totalitarian because it's one straight message. That's it. If you dissent, you're out. So
Yep.
it's very strange, to say the least.
And
But
and the worst part is that we've sorry just to chime in here is the worst part is we've or at least the government or whatever the messaging they've made it so that most people or like I'd say a majority of people are enforcing this and cheering this on for
yeah,
their own good.
that's what breaks my heart. That's really what
That's
breaks
the
my heart.
scariest part. You know, if
And
the government was trying something and like just for one example here is in Ontario when Doug Ford went even more bananas and what he just when was this? It was I think in the spring, and he tried to implement a new edict, which was cops can stop you whenever. Basically, like they stop you for your papers. Sound familiar?
oof,
That's what it was. It was they
oof.
can traffic stop you whenever they want, and they can stop you when you're walking on the side of the road. What your neighborhood? Now, luckily, a lot of the population was like, "What the fuck is this?" But not only that, for the cops, this was way out of the Overton window, right? And for those who don't know what the Overton window, we covered it. Go check out our old episode on the Overton window. Gives you all the 101 on it. But the majority of the police departments across the province said, "The fuck we are. We are not doing that. That is not free, and we are also not wasting resources on bullshit like this." So the majority of policemen and police organizations stop that right there, right? Because that was completely outside of their realm of what should be done by cops. So thankfully, that's kind of a white pill there, and it's it stopped the government from doing that because then he took it back and basically was is basically like an apology because it's like, yeah, I tried something authoritarian and it didn't work because the general public responded. This is the problem with the rest of the edicts is that you don't have average Joe Blow just going like, whoa, 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 this is not your role as government. I have freedoms that you can't impede upon.
What we're
But
seeing
they're not
now,
doing that.
what we're seeing now is that people, whether through just consistent messaging, sloth, or comfort, whatever factors are playing into this, have lost the idea that the individual comes before the government, it comes before the collective. We flipped it to the government is the overarching, and then whatever they permit, then the individual can have. And it's not that it should, it needs to be the opposite. If you don't have the individual first, you do have tyranny. You do have one over, unless it's a benevolent dictatorship. It's what you may call it, Marcus
Marcus
Aurelius.
Aurelius.
Unless it's Marcus Aurelius, which you get,
But he'd be canceled today, let's be honest.
one in every 5,000 years. Unless it's that guy, you are in for an awful time because
Yeah.
there is no check and balance, and you always say my rights come second to what Big Brother tells me, and
Yeah.
you just can't run like that. And maybe it's naivete from our age. We're both 30 years old, but I do not see a way where the opposite, having top down control, unilateral top down control, works.
I mean, I can give you some pretty big examples of what happens when you put the group identity first, when you put a collective first. Um, there's a big difference between. Well, first of all, I'll give you examples. I mean, look at Rwanda. That was 100% about groups. Uh, Look at the oppression of gypsies, Jews, uh, people with handicaps around Nazi Germany. Look at Maoist China. Look at the Soviet Union. All of those were based off of groups and then group laws and group think. Right. That's what it was. Those were atrocities that at this point, if we add all of those up, it's hundreds of millions of lives lost. Yeah, keep
Well,
going.
hang
I
on.
had a point, but
Let me finish my thought earlier that I had on capitalism
sure.
and how it gets old. So, free
Mm,
market. Okay, both you and me, let's say you, me, your sister, and four other our friends each have uh, a lumber company. We all have a lumber yard, and we're all competitive. Like we're all in the same market. Everything's going well. We all have, say, 15% of the market share. Okay, cool. Now, your business, you had a very good quarter, just happened to be that way. And your sisters had a slightly, a rougher quarter, whatever, their supply chain broke down or something. So you see a little bit of weakness. You say, hey, no problem. I'll buy you guys out. Now you have 30% of the market share. Everyone else has 15%. It's very free market, it's very open, completely legal, all fair play. Now keep on doing that. Now, since you're double the strength of someone, now you buy my company, you have 45%, you buy the next one, 60, and so on and so on. So I was kind of thinking about this the other day. And I don't know how you would implement the limit on this, because as much as I'm a free market guy, it's free market as long as it's competitive. At
mhm.
some point, if you just leave capitalism unchecked, it will result in oligopolies and monopolies just by nature of competition, because someone's just going to keep eating the next guy and the next guy, and then you will have the one person who controls the vast majority of the market share. So how do you put a check and balance in that? Because it would have to be strict, right? It would have to be, you are not allowed to own more than 40% of a market share, let's say. And the minute you do, you're fined out the ass, which is super authoritarian, very much. But it's
Mhm.
authoritarian. It's kind of like the speech that preserves speech. It's the competition that protects
Yeah.
competition.
Yeah, so I'll just to make things interesting here, I'll make the libertarian argument, like the classic libertarian argument here is that, and I think it has a lot of merit. Again, it doesn't necessarily have an answer to or a solution to your problem here, but I would make the argument that there are so many companies that have existed through our capitalist, history, and right now that are much more powerful than they would ever be because of the help of the government in, again, creating laws and quashing other businesses and other competition because they were lobbied for a lot of money and a lot of years by these very powerful companies who are now much more powerful thanks to the government. I was just listening to a great little report from I don't know if you know John Stossel. He's one of like these old school uh, reporters. He's a journalist. He makes cool YouTube videos now. You'd like him quite a bit. He always plays devil's advocate. He's one of the only few good journalists left, really, or reporters, if you will. But he had a nice little piece the other day about how basically this isn't really capitalism, or basically he was talking about corporations and capitalism. And he had looked at some historic cases like Heinz. Heinz became the first company to make ketchup or those kinds of sauces where they didn't, I forget exactly the ingredient, but it's an ingredient that they decided to vilify because they didn't need that ingredient anymore because they delivered their stuff by refrigerated train cars.
Oh, same idea as hemp and marijuana
Yeah,
and
yeah,
pulp and
exactly.
paper.
The fight on paper, yeah, exactly. So they convinced the government that it's not nearly as safe or as good for you to eat ketchup that has this specific ingredient that they've moved past from because again they were able to make a bit more money and have refrigerated train cars. So the government soon enough decided to ban and vilify all products that had that. So that Heinz, instead of owning whatever it may be, 10% of the ketchup market, they then blew up to 50 or 60%. Right,
Uh,
things like that, and there are thousands of examples.
Food is a really sketchy one, because same thing like
Yes.
the food pyramid back in the day. The You remember how it was like the base was wheat, and then
Oh yeah, it
fruits,
just
and then
changed
dairy, and
two,
then
two,
meats.
3 years ago.
Yeah, now it's a plate, which is a lot better. But the
Yeah,
one
which I will give the liberal government props there. Absolutely, a much more sensical, uh, guide.
the one that we grew up with, the food pyramid, had something like, I think it was 4 to 5 portions of dairy per day, which
Yeah, and a
you
shit ton of grain.
yeah, and a shit ton of grain. But
The most actually.
they were lobbied by the dairy, like, union or farmer or whatever, name the association. They were lobbied up to put like such a big emphasis on dairy products. When at the end of the
Mhm.
day, really, like look it up. You really don't need a lot of dairy. You need calcium and you need vitamin D, and you need the vitamin D to absorb the calcium.
Yeah. You
Vitamin
need
D,
proteins and vitamins. So you
yeah.
need mainly.
Well, you need macronutrients, micronutrients. The nutrition courses from the kin degree are getting a little bit far, but I do remember that calcium you
I
can
feel
get
like
in.
everything's getting a little far from your kin degree there,
Oh
Jason.
man, it is. But here's the thing about milk. If you look at the back of a 2 liter of milk, it's calcium added, vitamin D added. It's most of it's not even there to begin with, especially the vitamin D.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, so correct. And just to get back to, I forget the ingredient in this Heinz ketchup, or that was no longer in the Heinz ketchup. Turns out it's not a bad ingredient, right? But again, we've been made to think it is, and they lobby the government to then shut it down, right? Shut all other ketchup places that use this ingredient because it's bad for you. And I'm not saying there are bad things that people use, like lead paint, not the greatest,
Yeah,
thing to
asbestos.
use on your walls, asbestos, lead toys, things like that. But yes, there are. It's like the war on what is it? MSG? Is that it? Like
Oh yeah,
sodium
yeah, MSG. Yeah,
MSG? Yeah,
monosodium glutamate or something like that.
which again is a very natural occurring sodium. It's a natural salt. I remember watching something on it, and again, it's used in most of the time. It's used on Asian cuisine, and then for years, it wasn't that long ago that it was just like MSG free, all this stuff, right? And I remember listening to an Asian, I forget his name. He's a big shot in the U.S., but he's an Asian chef and was just like, "This is garbage. Like this is a natural sodium. Like it's just like saying no salt on anything, and you're like you put salt to flavor everything. So that's just kind of what a lot of Asian recipes use. It's just in a culture what we used, but apparently now it's really bad for you.
Yeah, and the same thing as the GMO thing, right? You got like, oh my god, it's GMO. It's so bad. It's like, okay, maybe, but
But it depends.
it depends
What's your
what.
term?
That's a very, very wide categories if you know a little bit of genetics. At the end of the day, GMO could just be, okay, this cucumber
Could be
flowered very
canola.
well. This cucumber grew very well. I'm going to choose these two here. Well, you're artificially selecting, right? So it's technically genetically modified. Or you could even
Yep.
do like a greffe, where you take like a pear and an apple and put the two tiges together, and then you'll get a whole
Yep.
pear apple. Like I, I
Yeah.
forget the
I
name
mean
of it now. That's
most
GMOs. It's genetically modified.
yeah, most willow trees are like that. They're yeah, greffé. I don't know. I forget the word in English, but they're bred together to create a new species of tree, or a specific species of tree, and that's how most willows operate. That's how a lot of fruit trees operate. Um, so again, what's your term? I often hear this, GMO free, and again, now that's become a sales point in our capitalist society, and it doesn't mean anything, just like organic.
Yeah, organic
But
is supposed to mean pesticide free, but a lot of them,
right,
probably
and
not all, but a lot of them are still grown with pesticides.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And
At the end of the day, just buy land, grow your own food because it'll always taste better.
yes,
Like
yes,
your parents have a massive gardens. Did your dad do a big garden this year?
oh yeah.
Nice. Like
It's his new child.
that. True. That and photography.
Mhm.
But
But yeah, no, I was just gonna finish on because you mentioned GMO. It's a perfect example. I always, when I enter those conversations or arguments with people, I'm like, but I don't agree with your term. We have to settle on the term first. What does GMO mean, right? It's a genetically modified organism. That means a lot of things. I can look at it from a holistic perspective and go, dogs are GMOs. They really are, right?
yeah,
And
artificially
then,
selected.
yeah, okay, oh, let's look at things we eat, right? Things in our kitchen. Okay, canola is exactly what that was. It was your crossbreeding seeds to make the perfect kind of plant that survives the climate you want it to grow in. So what works well in the dry prairies? Canola. That's how they figured it out. They crossbred. That is a GMO. Now, does it mean also products that, chicken that gets injected way too many steroids or antibiotics? Yes, it could mean that as well, but not necessarily, or not entirely, which is often the argument people make. They think of like, oh, we're all stabbing our chickens with antibiotics. Everything says no GMOs. And again, you're like, well, some GMOs are really good.
Yeah, there's never a black and
they
white.
and they've helped famines, right? Like you crossbreed things so that they could survive like a certain insect that comes around very often, or dryness, or extreme heat, or extreme flooding, whatever it may be. That's how we've often prevented famines across the world.
Yeah, and I agree.
So
Like I don't want to eat injected chicken, although I'm sure I have many a time before unknowingly. But yeah,
yeah,
to your
did,
point, there's a good and there's a bad and there's a way it can be done. Just by if you lump everything into one category, you're missing all the nuance of what actually is.
yeah, that's why it's important, guys. Whenever you're having a discussion with someone, doesn't I'm not talking a debate, just a discussion, but it's about something. Make sure you define the term first. Makes a hell of a difference. So if someone asks you a loaded question, it's just like, yeah, but do we even agree on the term in the first place, right? On the defined topic you're going to discuss. If you don't, then you got to figure that out before you start discussing the actual question at hand. A little side note though for antibiotics in chicken, it's often in chicken. It's mainly in chicken. But from again, no expert here, but from what I've heard, a few reports from medical reports, some doctors do fear that in the future, fairly near future, we will become more and more resistant to antibiotics because so much of our food, two reasons, so much of our food contains subtle traces of antibiotics, and doctors in general are giving people antibiotics way too much and way too fast.
Oh,
So
that's a huge concern in hospitals. That's
yeah,
massive because like
and-
just at the hospital where I work, like there's certain bacterias that are resistant to certain cleaning products, but not to others. And let's say they become resistant to the next cleaning product. What are you using? That's a problem.
yeah.
That's just evolution, right? That's one little bacteria that hey, this didn't kill me, and it just keeps on doing its thing. It
I mean, that's how
repopulates.
we're alive.
Yeah, pretty much.
We come from bacteria. So yeah, no, exactly. So um, they're worried about superbugs, right? Like you're saying, that will become resistant to antibiotics. And if one day, we wake up to a society where there are some bugs that just like antibiotics used to regularly fix and now they can't, we've got a big problem. We've got a way bigger problem than COVID. Then
You
we're
got
back.
you have a
We're
real
back several hundred years in
yeah,
healthcare.
you got a big actual pandemic on your hands there.
Yeah, yeah. You're to the point where people didn't know. Like you're coming close to the era where people hadn't discovered germs yet,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
At least now you have the infrastructure that you're like, okay, we can
Yeah.
start power testing everything, and
Gain of function, Jason.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Have you actually, side note here, this is what this whole episode is about. Just, sidestepping
Shoot it at
conversation
me.
for others. Gain of function. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you know enough to weigh in at all?
Don't know enough to weigh in. Never something that I
Okay.
studied. I can parse together the word, but do I know what it really means? No. So kind of no use shooting an uneducated opinion.
Okay. Because I was just asking because we are on the topic right now, and this is kind of what's come out with the whole COVID in the lab. Let's be honest here. Uh, it is what it is. It seems like it has been leaked from a lab.
Well, let me take it in
And
this direction. Well, we'll go
sure.
I'll put it into your wheelhouse, the free speech one. Okay, so we got this virus of unknown origin that happened to be spread out of Wuhan, China. Okay. Usually typical naming, Nile virus, Ebola, all that. You name it from the place where it comes from. So you could call it the
Oh,
Wuhan virus or the Kung flu if you want. But anyways,
yeah.
like say what you will about Trump, he was funny. like,
I agree.
calling it the Kung flu, that's just funny. I don't care. I don't care if it's not presidential. It's funny.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Objectively, he was quite funny. And I've reread some old stuff that just popped up, and I'm like, man, that's funny.
But anyways, that aside, because you're not allowed to have a positive, you're not allowed to see a quote unquote negative person in a positive light. Well, we'll get to
You
that one
can't
in a minute.
you can't even smile, actually.
Ooh, that's bad. Anyways, so this thing comes out of a place where there's a level 4 virology lab. We all know it. Okay, so that's a fact. Within 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers, whatever it was, you got a virus. However, Occam's, you know what Occam's razor is, right? So the simplest explanation is usually the true one.
Yep.
Occam's razor would 100% suggest that this brand new super virus that is extremely lethal would most likely come out of the building that studies exactly that, since it's a stone's throw away from it. Were you allowed to espouse that opinion up until 6 weeks ago?
Yeah, no. So I'll tackle that, and then I just want to go back to gain of function a little bit. It is one thing. Again, it's kind of a canary in the coal mine for the past year. Is for over a year now, people have not been able to simply ask the question, what exactly is this virus? How is it created? Where exactly is it from? I think those are all important questions, from the layman to the scientist to the politician. Everyone should be wanting very detailed answers to those questions. Before 6 weeks ago or so, like you mentioned, it was
You did.
pretty normal that if you pressed too much, if you asked too much, they had no problem ruining your fucking life. If you were a journalist who asked that question too many times, if you were a YouTuber, if you're a writer, if you're whatever, they have no problem getting you for, misinformation, which is the new Orwellian term that is completely overused by most Western governments right now. Man, is it ever scary to hear that word. Um,
It's we took
but
science and we turned it into science-ism, where
a religion.
hey,
We turn it
I
into a
I
religion.
have a master's in science. I can do science. I can run stats. I can do all the thing. I'm all for the science. It's developed the society that we have today. However,
It,
what we have right now, it's unless you are, the proper PhD, the PhD that we chose to put in front of the camera, unless
It's not
unless
a
you
PhD. It's unless you give people our message. Look at Bill Nye. Bill Nye doesn't have a PhD. Bill Nye is an engineer, and He's been passed around like everybody thinks he's got 6 PhDs in every form of science. He's an engineer. He's never had a master's in science or a PhD in science. Science,
Mhm.
and he's Mr. Science over there in the United States.
Yeah,
So
and
no, it's all
the
bullshit.
the point is, unless you're that expert, you are not allowed to have an opinion, especially not a contradictory opinion, or ask questions, or use Occam razor, or have a thought or a discussion. Because, like you said,
Mhm.
it's labeled misinformation, and that, like to your point, that is scary.
Yep.
That means you can't talk. And unless you're the chosen one, and that means there's always one chosen message, and it's behind the veil of, well, science is objective. So that means you how can you contradict science? It's objective, it's real, it's evolving. And that's
Yep.
another beauty of science that got co-opted, is that, yeah, science always disproves itself. That's one of the beauties of it. So now when the messaging changes, wear this, don't wear that, go here, don't go there, see these people, don't see these people, you always have the perfect excuse of, well, the science has changed. So, which means you can change your message as much as you want, as often as you want, and say, well, the numbers came in. We Sure, no big deal.
Yep.
But
No, I mean,
if you're the layperson, you're not allowed to espouse any opinion unless it's the one that just came out 24 hours ago by the state.
there are plenty of people, who either just their personal accounts or professionals who do this for a living, whether they're writers, journalists, reporters, whatever, who were banned from their main way, like breadwinning way, through their channels. They were banned. They were like just completely dismissed and made illegal or unable for them to do anything, to communicate any of this or ask any simple questions. And then, yeah, a month or 6 weeks ago, you get these leaked emails, and it's pretty clear that it's not from bats that were, a thousand miles away. Which, again, anybody think about that, guys? It's nuts.
Again, the Occam's razor.
Yeah,
What's simpler, the thing that's literally next door, or bats that
yeah,
were 1,000 kilometers away?
yeah. Things they work on, like gain of function, super juicing viruses, looking at old viruses like a coronavirus, because types of coronaviruses have existed forever, and doing new things to them. So thankfully, you have someone more, who's more on the left side, because we've clearly there's a big divide in these opinions throughout COVID and the pandemic, right? You can only think a certain way if you're from a certain political camp, but you have someone like Jon Stewart. I don't know if you saw that,
He kind
but
of
who was on.
dissented there a little bit, from
Oh
the
yeah,
ranks of the left.
yeah, and it looked pretty awkward for Colbert, who's now. I used to actually like Colbert quite a bit, and I've lost more than my entire respect for him over the
I,
last 5 years.
I remember
But
when Trump first got elected, and his go-to joke was, "I can't believe it because Trump is our president," and he like milked that joke for like 6 months, even more than that. I was like, okay,
oh, I mean,
you got nothing else to say. Orange
yeah,
man back, clap,
and
clap, clap, clap.
everybody, yeah, and everybody in the comedy world and the political world thought they were stunning and brave for saying, Trump's a Nazi, and you're
Yeah,
just like, not only is that complete misinformation, if that's what you want to use, it's also not funny because or brave because the entire establishment has been saying that forever, and so there's nothing original to your joke or your thoughts. So move on, please. But anyways, he comes on and he makes this really funny bit about how it was clearly leaked from the lab. And Colbert's trying to like shut him down a little bit. It's clearly awkward. And Jon Stewart just crushed it. He just kept going, right? And made it funny, although he was ridiculing it at the same time that this is like, no shit, guys.
and that's why you
Again, I
can't
think
cancel
too little.
comedians.
Yeah, and I think too little, too late. He kind of did it when it was safe for more people to do it or acceptable. When Facebook couldn't just be like, "Oh, we're banning you," because it was all over the news, so you can't really say it's misinformation. You got leaked emails from you know, the chief scientist. But anyways, yeah, what a joke, a very dark, scary one at that. You have folks like you want to talk about science. You have other scientists like Brett Weinstein and his wife with the Dark Horse podcast, both biologists who had been questioning this and been getting in all sorts of trouble and censoring and demonetization throughout this past year simply because they were asking questions about the origins of the disease.
And there's plenty of doctors who were pro
Oh,
lockdown, pro
plenty
everything,
of working
but
doctors.
but
Yeah.
there's plenty of doctors who were against the measures that were taken. But again, that's where the trust the science part kind of becomes muddy, right? Because it's okay, trust the science, but you're only trusting the people that say what you want them to say. All the other people that have a contradictory opinion, they just don't have a voice. They just don't get put on the CBC or the CNN or the media, or they get banned, or they get
Yeah.
demonetized.
Yeah. You were a quick joke here. You were talking about doing science. Another great gem you missed from The Office by not watching it, Jason, or anybody out there. Please watch The Office. This should pay me for
Shilling
pushing this episode on everybody. Crony capitalism right here. But Michael Scott is basically there. It's like safety presentations at work. So they go down in the warehouse, and you got all the blue collar workers, right, who show how the baler works. It's dangerous. It could crush your arm.
Yeah,
blah,
it
blah,
does.
blah. Careful the baler. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we had one at the hospital, and the freaking with like the tie wraps and everything. If you like the pressure's not right, one shoots out at you. Yeah, it's no joke.
Yeah.
That thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know how many thousands of pounds, but it'll crush most things. And the forklift, anyways, it's a lot more, labor. And then they go upstairs, and Michael Scott and HR try to do this presentation, but it's really lame because they all work on computers in an office all day, right? So it makes them sound like a bunch of pansies compared to the guys in the warehouse who are making fun of this presentation. So it just goes to a monologue with Michael Scott. He's like, yeah, they had demonstrations. They had things, concrete things to show. He's like, you don't just read about science. When you want to do science, for example, you go to a science museum and then you put your hand on a ball that puts electricity in your hair, and there you go. Science.
Correct. I endorse this message. That is the science.
Yeah, but all that to say, though, it's not, right? You could just, and this is kind of what's going on, is you have all of these very outspoken people, man. I see it every day on social media and news comments and stuff like that, where it's just like, educate yourself. And then they'll repeat the exact same headline that CBC had yesterday, right? Or CNN or whatever. And all they're doing is like, shut up, educate yourself. And you're like, but you're telling them to educate themselves simply because they have an opinion that doesn't match your dogma,
The mainstream opinion.
which is I know science. Anyways, all that to say, long-winded office reference to just be like, people are acting like as stupid as Michael Scott, where it's just like, yeah, you just go put your hand on an electricity ball and then you know science.
Well, I'm glad once the RCMP completely loses their mind and like, oh yeah, now we can go do authoritarian stuff. At least we'll have jokes so we can tell when we're getting carted away. So, see you there.
Exactly. You're welcome.
All right.
So back to gain of function. So it's been explained to me. I have a friend who's a neuroscientist. So I was like, buddy, sell me on gain of function, because it was coming out that that's a lot of what they were doing. Fauci and the U.S. federal government had even spent some money on funding firms that were directly and indirectly involved with working at the Wuhan lab. So come on, guys. Um, they
Whoopsies.
were doing,
Do you want to say
yeah.
that one again for emphasis?
I mean, it's out there. It's pretty easy to find. It was in the emails. It was shown that the federal government has been or had been giving research money to certain firms that were working with or at the Wuhan virology lab. Some of which was called gain of function. Now, for those who aren't familiar with gain of function is essentially working with pre-existing viruses or bacteria or whatever it may be, bad stuff, to try and make them either almost like GMOing them, right? Making them into either a superbug. So you take a regular virus and you make it into a new, more powerful virus, or you can crossbreed or whatever it is to make them maybe a different virus, or maybe a more, it contaminates more easily. Maybe its R naught is higher. Who the hell knows? Maybe it's just simply more powerful. Experiments on viruses to make them that much more powerful at the end of the day. So I was like, what is the benefit of that if you can get a leak and then, lock up the entire world? Or worst case, if it was actually a far worse, let's say it was like an extremely contagious version of Ebola. I mean, then we'd have a real problem.
Then it's a real problem.
Then it's a global pandemic, like truly. So I was asking my buddy, like, sell me on this. Give me the positives. And at the end of the day, I got to say, I still have a lot of questions before I approve of gain of function, because I find it's like playing God, right? The idea is, and yes, if it's used nobly and very safely, maybe it could work. But the idea is you super juice these viruses and then you come up with the cure, or vice versa, right? But so that if it does cross mutate with, bat feces or guana, I think it's called, or whatever it may be, right? If it meets up with a whole bunch of different bacteria and it becomes this much more contagious, then we know we have the cure for it. However, it's like maybe that'll never exist in the first place, because it will never have those lab-like perfect conditions to breed into a super virus.
Right.
So it's pretty scary. It is to an extent playing God, I find. So that's kind of it's partly what's been happening in the virology lab. So just in case folks aren't aware, that is part of what happens. And not sure I'm totally cool with gain of function, but
right. And I'm sure there's a little more nuance in there at some point that maybe we're studying it for cancer research, or we're studying it for this or that, or whatever. But at the end of the day, you're still taking something and at least assuming a certain amount of risk that if it were to get out, this would be a big problem. And you're still creating a risk that otherwise was not there.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember when I was doing that Master's of Science I was saying earlier, I went to this research conference, and there was a big shot cancer researcher there. And he was presenting how they were using viruses to treat certain types of cancers, because a virus is a lot smaller than a cell. And you can program, like the way a virus works is basically just a little capsule with genetic material on the inside. It's not alive. It's just really a ball with genetic code. And it's tiny enough and sticky enough that it'll jam onto the side of a cell, open up, shoot that genetic material on the inside of the cell. And then that will go and attach itself to the rest of the genetic material within the cell, replicate, make more of the genetic material of the virus, explode outwards, and that's basically how you catch a cold, right? It's that first little virus propagates, then eventually your body gets used to it and fights it away, and off it goes. But the idea that he was proposing was like, okay, what if I can rewrite the code, so very much GMO, rewrite the genetics of a virus, have it programmed that it attacks cancer cells and cancer cells
Hmm.
only. So it's a lot more precise, and it's a lot less invasive and harmful than traditional cancer therapies. And like, it was all presenting the research and all that. And on paper, it looked fantastic. Like whether that's in function now, I don't know. And it's probably only for certain applications. But that could easily be like one of the, say, it is a gain of function, right? Because you're taking a virus and giving it the function of, okay, go attack these cells. And if that's how it's used, hey, all for it, go right ahead. But if you're
Hmm.
making superbugs, then okay, again, that's nuance, right? And that's something that we've lost today is, well, this is one thing you're kind of just creating a risk for no reason. This is something that, okay, there most likely is a risk, but at the end of the day is ultimately a positive.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure it's closer to that where they use it, yes, to super juice and test for, bioweaponry and all these crazy viruses, but they probably also use more targeted therapy as well, like potential cancer treatment. It's kind of like mRNA wasn't used for vaccines first; it actually was used more for cancer, to fight cancer. It's not that new for cancer therapy,
So,
whereas it's novel for vaccines.
true. Um, let's switch gears a little bit. What's going on in Cuba?
Yeah. Uh, um, I mean, crazy riots, mostly peaceful riots.
Mostly
Is that
peaceful,
what you call them?
mostly peaceful riots. Just a few buildings burning, few murders, few
Mostly,
people getting carted out to jail. Mostly peaceful.
yeah, yeah, mostly fiery protests. Um,
So here's what
yeah,
I noticed with that.
go for it. So what
Uh,
is happening there, Jason? Enlighten
so
me.
again, I am not an expert by any means of Cuban politics. I apologize if I get anything wrong here, but here's what I got. Cuba's communist. It's been so for 60 years. Communism always fails. No way around that one. People finally
It's because
had
Jason. It's because it hasn't been tried perfectly.
true.
That's not real communism that was tried.
Silly human nature always gets in the way.
Yeah,
If only we could GMO people, make them perfect little communists.
yeah. If only we didn't have free will and
Ah,
individualism.
it really gets in the
Yeah.
way. Eh? Like if only there was like some like machine or like code, it kind of like be a matrix or something that you could just plug people into. But wouldn't that be better? But anyways, so people finally had enough for XYZ reason and are revolting, and then the totalitarian communist government is carting people away. And the Cubans are waving the American flag because they see America as a beacon of freedom. And it's well known that that Cubans regularly make the dangerous crossing to go to Florida in search of a better life and take great personal risks to themselves. So we know without a doubt that the current U.S. government is all pro open borders. Give me your, all your immigrants. However, all of a sudden they came out very strongly against letting in Cuban refugees. Now, Cuban refugees they're fleeing communism. They are very pro freedom. They are very pro business. They are very pro trade. Essentially, they're the people who are going to vote conservative. Whereas all the people coming from South America want healthcare, want free this, want free housing, want that. So they're people that are going to vote more Democrat
I
and
mean,
left.
they saw what happened in the Florida and mainly the Miami area with a lot of your Latino Cuban folks in the last election, where they voted. There was a massive amount who voted for Trump.
So what really stood out to me, like, okay, the Cuba thing is massive. Of course, that's a whole episode or two episodes in and of itself. But it's the different tone that the administration is taking with migrants who would most likely vote for them and migrants who would most likely not vote for them. And one is welcome, whereas the other one is not.
Yeah, because it's not guaranteed that there'll be future voters. I like Jason and everyone listening. Hate to break it to you, but like people need to get red pilled on this stuff. Everything is political. It is not to save lives. It is not to push or expand freedom. It is not for any of this stuff. It is all political. It is always about how can I get elected next? How can I make the next buck? How can we ensure that we're in power for as long as possible? All of these things, whether you live in a fascistic dictatorial regime or a democratic capitalist society, it is all political. Look at the decisions that have been taken in the last year and a half about masks, not masks, vaccines, not vaccines, all of these things where it's like, well, what's the other guy saying? Okay, cool. I'll say the opposite. Like it's just it's a complete farce, and they pretend it's about saving lives and assessing risk. Bullshit. Give me a break. So yeah, what's happening? I mean, you have the left wing, many of them, not all of them. Biden, for instance, did not say this, but you have some of the Democrats who are now blaming the U.S. Right again. It's this horrible white supremacist state that had its tentacles in Cuba and made for a shitty quality of life, all these things. And you're like, if look, there, U.S. imperialism has done horrible things. All right, it has done many things, too many things. It has micromanaged and created coups and regimes in too many countries. But to pretend that that's what has happened in Cuba over the last half a century or more, give me a break. Give me a break. You've got people there who are more patriotic than half of the folks in the U.S. right now who are waving the American flag. That kind of touched me as not even an American. I saw that and I'm like, that is the quickest. Still, I don't know how long it'll last, but for foreigners, even that is still the quickest and simplest symbol of freedom worldwide for them. Right? That's what it tells me. It tells me that without any words, they can simply wave the American flag, uh, still more than any other flag. And we all know around the world that means they're fighting against communism. They're fighting for freedom, the right to say things, the right to do things, the right
Right to
for
choose.
individual rights, the right to choose, all those kinds of things. And so that kind of touched me a little bit. When at the same simultaneously you have folks saying the flag is a symbol of oppression and hate and all this stuff. So that and yes, it's absolutely all political, right? They have realized over the last few years, especially the last election, that Cubans are truly from you know uh, a small communist state and do not want that anymore. They have swam waters to come here. They have risked it all to make it big in the U.S. or not even make it big and simply survive freely in the USA. Um, the land of opportunity, live the American dream, and stay as far away as possible from Cuban like way of life and politics. And they see what's happening on the Democratic side, and they want nothing, no part of it. And I mean, there's still probably quite a huge portion of Cubans and Latinos who are voting Democrat, but I think Democrats realize that they can put more efforts into other demographics and it'll be worth their time a lot more. Whereas Cubans are not worth gaslighting because they've lived it and they're like, screw that. I'm voting as far away as possible from communistic laws or
It's been evident for the last, I want to say like 6, 7 years, but it's very much coming to a head now in the US and even in Canada. Increasingly, you have two countries. You have the far left leaning socialists with, I would say, communist aspirations, especially Green New Deal, UBI, all that stuff. Very much
oh
authoritarian.
yeah, UBI drives me insane.
You have
The
that country,
ugh.
and then you have the freedom loving country that's no, just I want liberty. And I was listening to Michael Knowles' podcast, and I really didn't understand the difference between liberty and freedom. And I thought he broke it down really well, where liberty is the freedom to pursue what is good. So it's the freedom to go to work. It's the freedom to have access to markets. It's the freedom to protect your family. It's the freedom to associate with others. It's freedom to do like what needs to be done and not being impeded in doing what needs to be done.
It's
Whereas,
what the founding fathers wanted. They
eh,
talk about liberty.
exactly, and I really didn't understand what liberty meant, and he broke it down further, saying that the view of freedom that we have now is more so akin to licentiousness. So it's more like all the sexual variants and derivatives and all that is And it's also very communist in the sense that it breaks down the tradition, breaks down the norm, and breaks down, like healthy building blocks of society. So it has a communist aspect to it there. But it's the licentiousness that we're seeing is being said to be freedom. It's not freedom. It's pride. It's lust. It's sloth. It's just the sins. It's like the freedom to sin instead of the freedom to be virtuous.
Yeah, yeah, no, I see what you mean. And unlike so far, I think that point can be made because the word liberty or the term has not been co-opted. Whereas what happens, it's very much a tactic of the left, and again, it's very Orwellian. Is that you'll take a word and then you'll adopt it to mean your own thing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
As soon
And
as you
then you
do, you've
use
taken
that
control of the conversation. You've completely
exactly,
put the frame in your camp as soon as you
exactly.
redefine a word.
That's why I said early on, guys, if you're ever going to enter a discussion with someone, make sure you agree on the terms before they start. Make sure what you are talking about, that you define the term, because if you don't agree on the term, it's not going to get anywhere. Especially if someone takes a word and then, oh, well, it means this now, and you're like, that's not what this word means. But again, that's how you kind of brainwash and also tighten or adjust the Overton window for you and your type of groupthink, and not for the your opponents. So I can see it in that sense where liberty has not been co-opted as much yet, whereas freedom might have and has in some instances. I'd like to actually do an episode. I just wrote some notes here. We'll save this for another time, but we could talk about the difference between negative and positive rights.
Sure. Yeah. And again, everything is nuance, and the
Yeah,
more you delve into the nuance, the clearer and truer answer you're going to get.
but I think so. What's happening, and we could leave it at that. Maybe is negative rights is a term that's a lot more popular for your true classical liberals, libertarians, and some right wingers. Whereas positive rights today is what you're referring to more, which is where you basically turn many services and access to things into rights, which are called positive rights. Whereas negative rights, you have the liberty to do what you will as long as it doesn't impede on anyone else. Positive rights typically have to force someone else to provide something for you. And that's the big difference. So we can delve into an episode of that. Actually, we could even bring our lawyer friend to discuss that with us. But that's kind of at its core, it is a big difference you see between more of your left wingers and your right wingers, and that's a big rift you see in the culture where some folks simply believe in negative rights. So like, don't harm me, I won't harm you. I
Negative
have the
because
right.
nothing has to happen. Like it's just negative as in
Exactly.
avoid.
Correct. So it's like as libertarian as you can get. Whereas positive rights, people who believe in positive rights will say healthcare is a right. Whereas people who only believe in negative rights, like the founding fathers, will say healthcare is not a right, because at the end of the day, you have to hold a doctor at gunpoint for him to do the surgery on you, right? Or you need products to accomplish that surgery. Who makes those products? Blah blah blah.
Yeah, but the
So those
negative
are
rights will set the stage to be able to get that to you, anyways.
right. Go to a brook and drink some water, right? Uh, those are negative rights. I'm allowed to shout what I think because it's not violence. So again, see how that's being co-opted is, well, speech is violence, right? So the more you get into that, the more you're moving the Overton window, and you're kind of implanting this in people's minds that maybe speech is violence. And then next time when there's a law that's passed that does determine that speech is violence, many people are okay with that. And that becomes basically taking a negative right and completely destroying the definition of what a negative right means and turning it into something entirely different, which is simply to silence and control people.
I that's yeah no I think we could definitely make an episode on that. We'll get James on, and we'll yeah, that would be a good one. I'm gonna end on this. If someone presents to you a problem and a solution, the same person presents you both the problem and the solution, always remember that the solution is a solution that they want you to have. It's if they're presenting both a problem and a solution, they're steering you in a direction that is beneficial to them. I'll let you interpret that the way you want.
Yeah, and again, that could be good and bad. That's what I would say. Oh, or like it's human nature for everybody to do that. I'll leave everyone on this because we didn't cover it today, but usually our mostly recurring
Canceled
mostly is the word
us.
of the year. Yeah, our mostly recurring segment called canceled. I just want to read something that actually we don't have to predict. It is in the news. I had kind of a fun little group chat going with my family this week where we would send each other the most ridiculous headlines and see if you could top, the last headline that was shared. And this one I shared. This is from Windsor, so this is in CBC. Renaming Asian carp. Concern over racism. Waterways inspires push for new moniker. So Asian carp label refers to 4 different species of fish. I'm just going to read the few sentences here, but Minnesota State Senator Fung Haj, I'm not sure if I pronounced that correctly, was never a fan of the Asian carp, quote, label commonly applied to 4 imported fish species that are wreaking havoc in the U.S. heartland, infesting numerous rivers and bearing down on the Great Lakes. By the way, Asian carps are pests in many parts of the world. I think carp are a huge issue in certain parts of Africa as well. But the last straw came when an Asian business delegation arriving in the Minneapolis airport encountered a sign reading, "Kill Asian carp," as it is a pest. It was a well-intentioned plea to prevent the spread of an invasive fish, but the message was off-putting to the visitors. Haj and fellow Senator John Huffman in 2014 won approval of a measure requiring that Minnesota agencies refer to the fish as invasive carp, despite backlash from the late radio commentator Rush Limbaugh, who ridiculed it as political correctness. There, we already see the how we paint both sides, just in one sentence. I had more hate mail than you could shake a stick at, Hoffman said. Yeah, because you should be maybe concentrating on something else. Anyways, all that to say, now we want to change the word Asian carp to something else. I believe there's other types of carps in the world, like European carp, or there are other regionally named carps.
Yes, but there's only one culture that we're trying to destroy.
Correct.
Why we can't have nice things, folks. Have a nice day. We'll see you later.
There you go. All right. So that was our I guess, our hodgepodge, our potpourri, if you will, of what's on our minds and what's going on around the world. So thanks a lot for listening. It was another episode of the Independent Mindset. And like Jason said at the beginning, if you guys want us to cover anything, if you have questions, disagreements, whatever, send us a message. Best place is probably Instagram on our DM us at the Indie Mindset. And if not, find us wherever podcasts are found. We always appreciate a review, 5 stars, hopefully, at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, wherever podcasts are found. So thanks a lot, and talk to you next week. Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.